BamaCentral.com. I'm Katie Windham here with Austin, Hannon, and Blake Byler after Alabama's 17-3 victory over USF here in Tampa with instant analysis here on the field at Raymond James Stadium. Austin, definitely a more low-scoring game than people expected, but what's your biggest takeaway from the game?
Good question. I think the defense was good, and that was a good sign because last week, obviously, that was the biggest issue probably, other than turning the ball over and penalties, was defense. Obviously, not as big of a test today against USF and an offense that's a little inexperienced, and you could tell early on they weren't very comfortable in their quarterback throwing the ball downfield, and a lot of quarterback draws, but Alabama was able to get pressure. They didn't do that last week. Kool-Aid got an interception, but obviously it got ruled back. Malachi Moore had an interception on a pretty terrible throw. But the defense was good, and they made strides. The offense obviously has a lot of work to do, regardless of who the quarterback is, especially with the offensive line. But they won the game. I mean, Nick Saban said that in the press room just now, that they were happy to win the game, and he hopes the players are happy to win the game. But they've got a lot of work to do, especially because the SEC season starts next week.
Yeah. Blake, what do we make of this quarterback situation a quarter of the way through the regular season?
You know, that's the question. I mean, I think the answer is that we don't know. You started with Jalen Milroe. You had him for 2 games, and he had some really good flashes. He had some games like against Texas where he had some bad mistakes. He ended up losing the job. Tyler Buckner starts today. He goes 5 of 14 in the first half. Ends up getting pulled before the end of the first half. Really struggled. Didn't look very comfortable in the pocket. There were rainy conditions, so maybe that played into it. Didn't have great protection. Couldn't complete many passes down the field. So he gets replaced by Ty Simpson, who looks okay for the most part. He had the nice, I think it was 45-yard completion to C.J. Dupree down the middle of the field in the third quarter, which was Alabama's first touchdown drive. It kind of sparked that drive. So I thought he looked okay, but also he was getting thrown on his back just about every other play. He got sacked 5 times. All 5 of USF's sacks came against Ty Simpson. They had one of their defensive linemen had a record day, 3 sacks, career best for him. So I really think we're just going to have to take it day by day, probably like this Alabama team is. I don't think we've seen enough to be able to know who the guy is going forward. I don't think Coach Saban has seen that either. So we don't know who's going to start against Ole Miss on Saturday, which is kind of crazy thinking we're going into week 4 not knowing who the guy is going to be, but that's just kind of the reality of how the season has been.
Right, so after the game, Saban said Alabama will evaluate all 3 guys, and they'll have stuff to look at from all 3 guys now that they've all played with first-team snaps in real games. Not that they played fake games, but y'all know what I mean. In a real game-like situation when the game is still on the line. But like you said, we don't know who'll be quarterback for Alabama on Saturday against Ole Miss. But like Saban said too, Alabama ultimately comes away with the victory. Not a pretty game at all. Lots of things still to fix. But Alabama wins 17-3. That'll wrap up our instant analysis here from Raymond James Stadium. But there will be plenty more coverage coming from BamaCentral throughout the weekend, so be sure to check that out.